Jealous for me, love's like a hurricane. I am a tree, bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. When all of a sudden I am unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory, and I realize just how beautiful you are. Great your affections are for me. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. How he loves us. And he is our prize, drawn to redemption by the grace in his eyes. If grace is an ocean, we're all sinking. So heaven
Praise him, all his angels. Praise him, all his heavenly hosts. Praise him, sun and moon. Praise him, all you shining stars. Praise him, you highest heavens, and you waters above the skies. Let them praise the name of the Lord, for at his command they were created, and he established them forever and ever. He issued a decree that will never pass away. Praise the Lord from the earth, you great sea creatures and all ocean depths, lightning and hail, snow and clouds, stormy winds and do his bidding, you mountains and all hills, fruit trees and all cedars, wild animals and all cattle, small creatures and flying birds, kings of the earth and all nations, you princes and all rulers on earth, young men and women, old men and children. Let them praise the name of the Lord, for his name alone is exalted. His splendor is above the earth and the heavens, and he raised up for his people a horn, the praise of all his faithful servants of Israel, the people close to his heart. Praise the Lord.
You give life, you are love, you bring life. God intended it that way, which is why I became a chef. I love cooking meals for friends and family, believing that eating with others multiplies the enjoyment, something even Jesus appreciated, by not just feeding the body, but feeding the soul. A few years ago, my relationship with food and my relationship with God were both not good. I was working as a chef, restaurant to restaurant, no time for myself, working from 7 in the morning to 2 o'clock in the morning. So there was no time for myself, let alone a relationship with God. I would cook for hundreds of people a night, but then eat my own dinner in my car or over a trash can. Before going home, I'd immediately fall asleep. I've always known I wanted to be a chef, but after college, I had to ask myself, is this the life I want? I felt I was losing my passion, so I prayed every night for weeks, asking for guidance. A new job appeared on my Indeed, lead chef, Child Care Center, Washington, Illinois. I live in Bloomington. Why is Indeed showing me jobs that are 45 minutes away? Well, I guess kids are cool. I'll go ahead and apply. No harm in just applying. The job did not post where it was at. It just gave me the address. I showed up. I arrived, and to my surprise, it was a church, a child care center. I was offered the job almost immediately. Although hesitant, I felt drawn there. I took the job, and little did I know how much it would change my life. I moved here to Peoria, away from all my friends and family, to start this new journey. My first day at work, I go out into the cafeteria. I notice all these kids singing a prayer over the food that I created, something I've never seen before. Children eating together as a family. It was absolutely beautiful. Just seeing the kids pray together, pass the food, and just be in community really just warmed my heart. It was just humbling. Well, until one kid spilled tea all over the floor. But anyway, I knew this was where I needed to be, serving these children nourishing food so they can have brain power in the classroom to grow and learn. In Genesis, it was said, everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. Every day I take these ingredients that God has given to us and I make them into new, beautiful things. For example, wheat isn't good by itself, but if you add a few more ingredients, you have bread. See, I love bread, and I love carbs, but bread is more special than a USDA required serving that I have for the children. I often think of Moses, who fed his people in the desert with food which fell from heaven, and during the Last Supper when bread became the body of Christ, or when Jesus multiplied the bread to feed the crowd. Bread became a sign of sharing. It also symbolized the Word of God, which nourished the crowds. In addition to my new career, I started my hunt for a church home. I was drawn to Imago. Now, if you told me a few years ago, growing up Catholic and Lutheran, hey, you were going to be a chef at a daycare in Peoria and attending a church called Imago Dei, I would have laughed at you. But this community has brought me so much joy, and the children here in Peoria brought me so much joy. I can honestly say I am happy. I put faith in God and know exactly where I need to be.
Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Imago. Will you pray with me as we continue forward? God, we thank you for always being with us, but there are certain spaces that we find you more. And so I pray today that each person here, that somehow they will experience you, whether that be through a conversation, through the message, through the art, or just through the fact that we are your people. Help us to lean into the spaces you ask us to lean into. Help us to stand up for the things you want us to stand up for. Grateful for this place to be. Everyone is welcome. Where all can feel safe and loved, because that's how you want us to feel. In Christ's name, amen. All right, time for our meet and greet. If you have kids in the 4K class, feel free to take them down the hallway and get them checked in. Sunday school classes today. So you are all invited to that. It starts 11:30ish. We'll be over there. It looks great. Linnell has done such a good job of organizing it, so excited to celebrate. A couple of other things. If you are interested in still supporting our team that's heading to Honduras in a few weeks, there is an Amazon wish list. You can go online and find it on our Facebook page. I don't think we put it on the webpage, but we can do that if you need it. And you can just click on an item. They take like gloves to work with, but they also have like balls and coloring books and crayons and things that they can do with the kids while they're there, which always go over really well. So they'd love for you to participate that way. If you need more information on that, check out the notes. And this week on Tuesday, I'm still looking for a couple more people who'd be willing to hang out with a great group of kids Tuesday evening. We have Family Corps is using our building, so they've invited all the foster parents that they have at their agency, and they'll all be in the parking room, and then we're going to take care of the kiddos during that. So if you are interested in a one-time babysitting commitment, let me know. It should be a good time, and I will be there to help manage the chaos. So, all right. Oh, Corey.
I have a question.
Yes.
How do people find the wish list?
Yeah, let's see what is in here. The Amazon wish list, or I said at the donation center, but I'm not sure if that got accomplished or not. So I can post something on Facebook again, and Josh can put it on the webpage. Yes. Okay. It is on the website. Okay.
It is.
According to Ashby. It's already been posted to Facebook, so if you're in the We Are Imago group, you will see it on there. Okay. All right, let's go. Shannon's going to explain what she's doing up here with all of her lovely supplies. Oh, no, she's not going to explain that. Just kidding.
Okay. Which is a weird thing for me because as a teacher, I teach at Illinois Central College, I teach ceramics. And so to be up there while everybody's singing or talking, it's like, I have to force myself to be like, and now we're doing this because we need to do this, because if you don't do this, your thing will blow up. So, but Josh asked me to talk. My name is Shannon, by the way. Will you put that picture up, Derek, if you can? We have this is just like so full circle, by the way. Okay. So there's a picture floating around on the slideshow of that right there. And it was funny when it popped up on the Facebook because I was like, oh, that's a super depressing piece. But it looks lively and fun. So I thought I would write up a little piece to explain a little bit about that piece, but then also about the work that I make in general. And Josh had spoken last week about how sometimes as artists, at least for myself, I feel vulnerable people in the world. I make something that is coming from my heart to, especially when you're in graduate school, to be like, here's this thing that means so much to me, and then critique it for 2 hours, and then tell me how horrible it is. But this was not during graduate school. This was during my time in UW-Madison. So I just wrote up a little piece to kind of explain what it means. So one of my own artworks I have had a deep emotional attachment with concerning identity was created during my post-baccalaureate program at UW-Madison in 2014. I was frustrated with many of my current circumstances, so I decided to use my own personal narrative within my artworks to create a deep connection. The piece is called For the Love of Life. Being a 32-year-old woman at that time, newly married, I started to reflect on forced traditions and being a female. Also, in addition to added pressure from my family, society, and myself about children, which did not help the situation at all. And for some reason, when you want a child, everybody else is having a child. Like, even my graduate professor, when I got to school, was pregnant. So I was like, joke's on me. So that year, I was not accepted into graduate school, which added even more time-sensitive pressure. So putting a portion of my life on hold, again, as a mother, was not looked back on fondly during my time in Wisconsin. This piece was specifically about feeling barren, not because I biologically could not or didn't want to, but due to my current situation, I had to mentally force myself to wait. Having a child in graduate school sounds like a hot mess, in my opinion. So, although I'm sure my family and society meant no harm, because they're very lovely people, their social instruments of regulatory regimes, also known as feminine construct, sent me to a dark place for not performing my female duties. Identity seems to have so much baggage, and at times can trap a person into an unwanted existence. However, allowing myself to work through those emotions, finishing my schooling, collect my life back together has made me a very successful person. This was the first piece that I had allowed myself to be vulnerable to, my audience, in order to seek a true, pure, genuine connection from them. This tactic I would continually use for the rest of my life in creating my work. The many-sided polyhedral sphere represents myself, so in a way, this is a self-portrait. The colors are indicative of what we think femininity looks like, while the darkness represents a void in my womb. Now, you can't see the inside, I sent a picture, but if you were to turn it, the whole inside is like pure black with like this hint of like black glimmer in the inside. So the black glimmer from the inside comes from a material called ilmenite, which is a raw ceramic material, something I also do to showcase my ceramic identity. This glimmer represents a promise to myself at that time, the promise to the possibility for the future of motherhood. The black vinyl pieces represent moments in my life where I chose to say no to those possibilities. Calculated for every month since I began my womanhood till that present time, everything is placed in a nest-like formation for protection, preservation, and the reflection of my hopes, wishes, and dreams to have it all.
I'll invite our scripture reader up. Thank you, Shannon and Todd, both for sharing yourselves with us this morning.
I do want to say it was worth the wait.
This morning's passage comes to us from Exodus 20, 8 to 11 from the New Living Translation. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them, but on the seventh day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Eric and Ashby. Appreciate that. So, if you haven't noticed, we're in a series on art and spirituality and different ways that people express themselves through many different creative forms. And so, throughout the next 2 more weeks, we'll continue to explore that with different unique ways, of those ways that exist in our community. So, with our passage read today, what are our thoughts? What are our questions, our doubts, our wondering about this passage? Yes. Just a little bit louder, sorry.
I wish we could take a day off, but everybody's got
I wish we could take a day off, but everyone's got to eat. Okay, yes, there's a place of personal privilege. Yes. It's kind of crazy how God made the world in only 7 days. Yes. Yeah, Kristen. It's crazy how a lot of people have to drink food and water. Yep, yeah, that's true. We always have to be rehydrating and nourishing ourselves.
God is awesome and can create the earth in 6 days, but even God must have been tiring for him after those days. So he said to himself, I want to rest. And so he created that space for us to rest as well.
Interesting. So to consider the fact that maybe God was tired on that 7th day and he had to rest, or she had to rest. What else?
God said to treat the foreigner just as well as you treat yourself.
Yeah, God said to treat the foreigner just as well as you treat yourself.
I'm wondering what this meant for women at that time, because it says your sons and daughters and you, but I'm wondering if they consider childcare work, or if that was just what she was supposed to do and she wouldn't take a rest from that on Sunday.
Yeah, wonder
Take
if
care of the children on Sunday.
That's a one-day neglect.
You're figure it out in there.
Yeah, wondering if childcare is a form of labor, and who takes care of the child on that day then? What does that look like as far as work? Absolutely.
The big question is, what is time for? I mean, I get my coffee cup down there here. Why physically move an object? Not that heavy, but that's work.
Sure.
Is that too much? I mean, if I get up and I walk somewhere, I'm spending energy.
Yeah.
So that's work, and how much work can you do? That was a big discussion back in the day, like how much work can you do? And sometimes even in the Gospels it says that they went these Sabbath days journey.
Yeah.
Back then you could walk a certain distance, but the Sabbath because you have to move around. But you could go further.
Sure. So what is considered work? I mean, that's an excellent question. I mean, everyone had sort of different ideas. Even what you just said about the walking distance. Certainly, you could only walk a certain distance. Otherwise, it was considered work. I'm thinking about people who, the Pharisees, religious leaders. They made rules to help you follow the rules. And one of the rules to help you follow the rules they made was you can't look at yourself in the water, because you'll see your reflection and you'll realize there's something going wrong with you, and you have to, correct it, and that's work. Isn't that fascinating? Yes.
I was going to say, he made us in his image. God made us in his image. Why would he expect us to do something that he didn't do, which was rest, creating the earth, things to do it? And I think about that. It's like, okay, well, God, you made me in your image. So why would I try to do more than you?
Yeah, God made us in God's image, so why would we not try to emulate that in every way? Gerald, is that what you're saying? Yeah, that's great. Dustin.
It's a good reminder for me and for us not to kind of go against the westernized culture of like machine and productivity. Like we aren't machines designed to just be working. Our value goes beyond what we produce.
Yeah, I love that, because that makes me think about, like, when somebody asks you how are you doing, like, it's actually a prized thing. Like, oh, I'm staying busy and I'm doing a lot of things. I'm getting things done. If someone asks you how you're doing and you said, like, oh, I'm resting so much, I just feel so well, people will be like, well, you need to get another job or something, right? Because it's our Western mindset is this idea of productivity, like you said. I love that. Yeah.
Yes, that was the Old Testament, but today Jesus is our Sabbath.
So for you, Jesus is our Sabbath.
Well, that's what the Scripture says. Amen.
Yeah. What else?
I always question this. God's ways are not our ways. I don't think His time is our time. So when we look at this, is it actual 6 day, literally 6 days, our 6 days, was His 6 days?
Yeah, that's a great question, one that's been asked for a long time, right? Like, is this a literal 6 days, or is God's time beyond our time? And so, we understand this differently. And yeah, that's a hard question that everyone has to kind of wrestle with where they fall on that. Yep. Mark?
What do you say about the work relating to, like, you created a day that was not to have work in the sense of, I think you say that how related to having a day separate in terms of giving credence to that day for a spiritual day that you do nothing, just to have that time spent for reflecting or relating to not the rest of the week you have do this, not to work that day. This is what it relates to.
Yeah, absolutely. To take time to reflect and to regroup, and that's what the Sabbath can be. Yeah.
There's another understanding. Like sometimes it seems related to something that reflects in that day. There's also something to, like the Christian sense that a legalistic, a legal understanding of how you law, the sense of love, or how you can be back on what known as truth. It gives a certain sense of outside religion. Act as a man, and religion can inhibit someone to know what they do is otherwise, and drug or has a sense of a way of not acting upon what you know, and religion and seeing, especially the age we live now, to see how we see things and act with courage, not cowardliness. When it comes down to truth of other people, religion can inhibit one to act upon other as a man or a woman. Other people, religion puts a damper on it and not knowing how to engage other people in a very timid way. And really, God told me to do this, and the others, I live on TV, they show people mocking. I realize I'm Christian, religious, spiritual, but on the other hand, who are not religious, who have high-paying jobs, make a joke or an ask or whatever you word of religion, and they're fanatic religion, they don't know how to act on the other
Mark,
side. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you. Let's continue this conversation. I know you have a lot to share and passion there, so let's continue to talk about that. But let's create space for other people to continue to speak and talk and speak into stuff. What else, Corey?
So I was reading into this a little bit. I'm trying to like for me, what's the difference between work and restful things?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it, I think, comes down to the mindset that you bring into it, whether you're being reflective or not, and whether you're being busy. Like you can sit up there and solve something because you have deadlines and have all these pressures on you, and it can be a lot of work. Or you can do it in a relaxed manner, really enjoy it, and then it's a restful, introspective thing that refreshes your spirit. So it's not the particular task that you're doing, it's the external stresses and things that you bring into the situation that make it workful or restful.
That's an excellent point, and that it depends on the exterior or interior way in which you view something that you're doing. Even like mowing the lawn, I love it. It's just therapeutic, and I know Jamie Harwood loves it too from his Facebook post this week. And it's sort of reflective, and it's a time to be outside, and you're doing this work. But other people, it's work, right? And they don't want to do it. So it's also based on our own perspective of what we consider to be work and what we find to be joy. Just a few more thoughts. Yes.
It's like a weekend, how you have to work for a time and then get the weekend refreshes you.
Yeah, it's like a weekend. So we have it built into our kind of culture, right? A time to take a break from work, and it refreshes you. That's right. That's an excellent point. What else? Yes.
So, a couple things. The Sabbath as a gift. As a movement, as a gift, not as opposed to obligation.
Yes, it's a gift.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Gracie, did I see your hand up? No, you were just petting mom's hair. Okay, wasn't sure. All right, couldn't figure it out. All right. Yes, anyone else? Mindy?
I do think it's interesting that even the most conservative among us are quick to dismiss this commandment.
Yes.
The rest of them still apply. Even Jesus said he upheld the value of the heart of it, even as it was being twisted. And so I just think maybe before we say, oh, but this doesn't apply to us anymore because, Old Testament, blah, 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 we should really maybe look and see how much of that is American, consumerist, kind of like what Dustin was saying about values or productivity, and how much of that is that we're almost afraid of what it would look like if we did take it seriously.
Yeah. We're so quick to dismiss this one, but all the other 10 are still, good to go. But there's something about it. Jesus doesn't just throw it out. I think I have it written down here that it is, Jesus mentions the Sabbath many times, 50 times in all 4 Gospels the Sabbath is mentioned. That's more than the entire 5 books in the Bible. If Jesus was going to throw this baby out with the bathwater, he could have, but he didn't. For some reason, he seems to talk about it a lot, and religious leaders were obsessed with it. And he doesn't throw it out, he just reframes it and helps folks see what the heart was, because like we good humans do, we like everything to be very black and white, and we like everything to sort of give us the assurance that we're doing all the right things the right way. So then what do? Like I talked about earlier, we make rules to help us follow the rules, instead of just being able to value the rule that was given to us and the message behind it. Well, let's jump in, because I'm already ready to fire up and ready to preach here, clearly. So, it's interesting to me that in our American culture there is this push to continually work and do your very best and be busy, and if you're not, something's completely wrong with you. There was this quote I saw this week, posted by Mr. Rassler here, that I thought, that's perfect for my very first sermon illustration. So I wanted to share this with you. This quote by Steve Jobs that he said toward the end of his life here, that I wanted to share with you. Steve Jobs, we know, is or if you don't know, is an individual who founded Apple, and right? It's Apple, yes? Yeah. And in many ways was praised for his deep work ethic and his intellectual and his drive. And as he sort of reflects on his life, this is what he says. I've come to the pinnacle of success in business. In the eyes of others, my life has been the symbol of success. However, apart from work, I have little joy. Finally, my wealth is simply a fact to which I am accustomed. At this time, I'm lying in a hospital bed, remembering all my life. I realize that all the accolades and the riches of what I once was so proud have become insignificant with my imminent death. Moving on, I skip a few things in this, and he finishes his quote with, please treasure your family, love for your spouse, love for your friends, treat everyone well, stay friendly with your neighbors. That last part's interesting. Love your neighbor as yourself. Stay friendly with your neighbors. And who is our neighbor? It's everyone who's created in the Imago Dei, the image of God. It's interesting to me, this man who seems to be the ideal of what all so many of us sort of thrive for, of a life of perhaps comfortability and financial security and success and being noticed and praised and acknowledged. At the end of his life, he sort of just says, wow, I did all that, but I often neglected this over here. And because I neglected this, I'm putting things in perspective again. And at the end of his life, having to sort of put all those things in proper place. I think that from Steve Jobs here, we can see that we must take time to cease from what is necessary, from always doing, and shift to being. What I think is beautiful about some of our artwork here that's been displayed so beautifully by Mandy, and who did you say out to? Jessica McGee's husband, what? What's his name? James. Thank you. Oh, by the way, if you don't know this about me, I hate it when people just refer to somebody. I know you weren't doing this, I just didn't hear you. But I hate it when people refer to someone as just someone's spouse. Like as if this person has no identity, right? Male or female. It's like, no, they're a spouse, but they also have a name. And I learned that lesson through my grandmother, because I would often just be like, people would just call her, this is Josh's grandma, or this is Josh's mom, as if they were in like my shadow. And they eventually shared with me how that they were proud of that, but they also wish that people knew their names. And so I think that's an interesting thing just to be aware of as we think about creative expressions of self. So there's these beautiful different pieces up here that I think it's important for us to realize that there was a lot of sort of work that went into this, and that work might have been somewhat therapeutic, right? Or maybe it was for a deadline. Or maybe it was to relieve deep stress, or maybe it was an assignment given by a therapist that said you need to figure out how to express yourself in such a way. And there was deep emotional turmoil to be able to produce such things. But what I think is beautiful about this is that there was a season to do, but then there's also a season to just be and step back and look at the work. And to take in that which you have created, and to enjoy and appreciate it. And I think about creation narrative we've read this morning, of this picture of creation being created, and then there being all this doing that's happening, and then there's a call to step back and to just be. And then there's a call to Adam and Eve to begin to do, right, to sort of care for the earth, and to be creative. And as we have seen in our world today, we live very different than a garden. Many of us live in a much more developed world, because there was lots of doing over the centuries. And for that reason, I believe that God also calls them and calls us to a sense of also just being able to be, to enjoy the work that we have done, or that has been done for us. And so what I would love us to ask this morning is this question of what does rest look like? What does Sabbath look like? And does Sabbath actually have to be a day? Or could this be daily space we create in our days, where we take mini Sabbaths that eventually add up to rest and restore our souls? What I mean by that is it possible that each day we take a few hours or an hour, or we're intentional in some way that for this time each day, I am going to carve away a Sabbath time. A time to rest, a time to cease from what is necessary and embrace what brings me joy, a time to cease from doing and just to embrace being. And eventually, all that time will add up in that week, and you won't have to sort of like drill yourself into the ground and get to day 7 and be like, oh, I don't even feel like I can do anything. And some of us maybe even push ourselves through day 7 and go into Monday even more exhausted. What is balance? What could Sabbath look like in our context? Well, the Hebrew word that's used for Sabbath in Scripture, this verb is interesting. It actually means to rest. It's not the idea, though, of physical recuperation or physical exhaustion or exertion. This word actually means more of, or it doesn't even mean this idea of even sleeping even. Because I think some of us in maybe our theologies, maybe we would think that God never sleeps, or that God does not get exhausted. Others of us may believe that God does. But in fact, this word Sabbath actually means this. It means to cease, or to abstain, or to not work. In other words, it means to come to a complete stop of activity that would otherwise be classified as work or labor. To come to a complete stop of that. It's interesting. And it doesn't necessarily mean because you're exhausted or you work yourself into the ground and then you take the break. But it's this idea of learning to cease and to provide yourself with good self-care. But I think furthermore than that, what is even more interesting is there are two reasons for a Sabbath in the Bible. Two reasons. There's two different spots that are given. The very first one here is in Exodus 20. And it's the idea of remembering creation. The reason given is to stop and to remember all that's been given, all that's been created, all that has been done, to cease and to give good self-care. But then there's this other one in Deuteronomy 5:15. It's remembering God's faithfulness. Can we pull that scripture up really quick? We just read the one from Exodus, but let's do the one from Deuteronomy. All right. This is what Deuteronomy says. It says, remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, talking to the Israelites, but the Lord your God brought you out with his strong hand and powerful arm. That is why the Lord your God has commanded you to rest on the Sabbath day. Well, that's interesting. So they've been brought out of slavery, and God's been faithful, and they've been wandering in the desert, and God says, you're supposed to rest now. Well, but I thought the reason was this whole 7-day thing, and then you rest on the Sabbath. But there's another reason. So what's this about? What are the connections here? I think there's something that's trying to be communicated to us that in the midst of busyness and doing and hardship and life and the challenges that we're called, whether that's wandering in the desert for 40 years or whether that's a creation being built and tending to and making time to cease, that there's a time when you stop and you do what? You remember that it all doesn't depend on you. That it's all not... The world won't fall apart if you take some good self-care time. Actually, the world will fall apart if you don't take some self-care time because you can't take care of anyone else if you yourself aren't taken care of. Right? You are no good to anyone else if you first aren't taking care of yourself. Right? This beautiful picture to stop, to take time, to breathe, to remember the faithfulness of God that brings the Israelites out of Egypt and out of slavery. This faithfulness of God, to remember this God who orchestrated and provides our needs. While at the same time, I must acknowledge that there's a lot of frustration and doubt in me when I think about the passage in Scripture that says that God provides even for the lilies of the field and the birds in the sky and da-da-da. I get frustrated with that because all I have to do is turn the TV on at 1 o'clock in the morning and see the commercials of children dying from starvation, and I'm wondering, God, I don't understand you providing for the lilies of the field and the birds in the sky, but these children are dying because they don't have any food or access to water. And I'm not dumb to think that doesn't happen right here in our own backyard and in the United States as well. And I've wrestled with it for many years, and what I have come to in my own heart and conclusion is that God has provided all of the resources, but unfortunately those whom He's trusted the resources to aren't too good at delegating those. We hoard more than we need, and we haven't been as stewards of it as we're supposed to. And God calls us to steward those well. And I think there's a sense of, as Pastor Justin was talking about earlier, there's a deep, deep sense of just work, gain all that I can, all that I have, and all these materials. And if I have more, it's because I've worked harder and I've earned it and I've gained it, instead of an idea of a communal mindset and an idea that you don't need all of these things, you just need enough for today. I think that what's even more interesting is to look at Jesus. Jesus on the Sabbath. There's a story in Mark chapter 3 where Jesus heals the hand of a deformed man. And after he performs this miracle, the religious leaders, they have the panties in a bundle. They are just so upset. They just are so undone. They cannot believe that this happened. Guess what? religious leaders, as soon as that happens, you know what they do? They sit, the Bible says, in this very passage in verse 6, after Jesus does that, they sit in a circle, and it says that they were very angry that Jesus had broken the Sabbath, and so they plotted how to kill him. So it's all right on the Sabbath to plot how to kill someone, to do that hard work of how we're going to get him. But it's not okay to heal someone's deformed hand. The hypocrisy, the religious hypocrisy there, it's just unacceptable. I said panties in a bundle. I don't actually know if that's offensive or not. Like potentially to women. I may never say that again. I don't know. My spirit was like, check. You know? So, all right. It is the worst. Okay. Never again.
It was certainly descriptive.
It was descriptive, yes. You're all picturing people picking a wedge up or something. It's always good to name when you think you might have done something wrong, right? So, even the preacher. So I think that it's important for us to step back and to remember that sometimes when we uplift a law or a rule or a concept so high that you lose the story behind it, right? I think that's exactly what happens within religiosity today, is that people don't know how to love other people because they're so stuck over here thinking that they got to bring the hammer. I was talking with Linnell this week about the tension of I don't understand, why is it so difficult for people to understand equality for all, and all people should be treated equal and treated with dignity. And I know from my own upbringing that it's because there are some people that think that some people should be punished for their actions, and their rights should be taken away. We think about this as particularly people who have served time, that they no longer deserve to have rights, no longer deserve to have a voice. And so they think that people should be punished so that they can learn lessons. And it's not that they're not being treated equal, it's just that they lost their equality. And I think when we get into that mindset, that can be so damaging. I think God is calling us to remember, just like here on the Sabbath, is calling us time and time again to not lose sight of what is important. So what is a Sabbath, in my opinion, in my idea? I think a Sabbath is to cease from what is necessary and to embrace what brings you joy. And notice, I don't say it has to be on a certain day, from a certain time to a certain time. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is this, is I'm saying that I think we should create space in our lives. It may be a day. But if the day really isn't possible for you, then I would challenge us maybe start with an hour each day. Start with some time where you edge away, where you just begin to care for your soul in such a way that you cease from what is necessary and you embrace something that brings you joy. And guess what? We just talked about earlier, some people, what is work to one person is joy to another person. Something that's a joy to one person is work to another person. I don't know what that looks like, but I call us to perhaps consider what that would look like in our own context. To stop doing what is necessary and to simply do something that you want, something that brings you life. Many people, though, at the same time I realize this, and I'm really glad you brought this up, Meg, many people have families. So to find time to be able to just cease what is necessary, raising our children, and to embrace something that brings joy, it takes a lot of work. Sometimes it even costs money. And so you're working harder on this end to be able to cover childcare on this end. And I recognize that, and I call us maybe figure out what would ceasing from what is necessary and embracing what is joy look like to sometimes maybe to try to do as a family. So I know there's some families that, I think Ashby, maybe you mentioned this to me this week, that some families just put their cell phones away for a time each Sunday afternoon and say, this is just our time together, we're going to play games and we're going to hang out, and we're just going to disconnect. We're going to cease from all the necessary tasks and to-do lists and emails and responsibilities, and we're just going to do something that we can embrace joy together. I don't know what that looks like for you, but I would say, don't be legalistic about it. I would just say, embrace the concept and integrate it into our lives. I'll tell you this story here as we start to bring this sucker in for landing. When I resigned from the church I was pastoring in Kentucky, I was burned out. I mean, just burned out. I had spent most of my early 20s and through my high school years, hiding and working ridiculous amounts of time because I was so scared of myself. And I was scared if I could just cease for a little bit and do something that brought me joy, or just cease for a little bit and step back and look at my life and the canvas of my life and what that looked like and where I was at and where I was headed, and really just took a pulse of my life, that I would just probably melt down into a puddle and come undone. And after a while, what that began to turn into was the church I was pastoring. I worked ridiculous hours. I probably worked, what would you say, Linnell, 70, 80 hours a week, easily? Because I didn't want to go home to an empty and a quiet house. Because the silence was deafening. And being alone was deafening. And I knew in the silence, even with the TV on in the background, I had this 5-bedroom home that even just cleaning it sometimes was a reminder, you're alone, you're always going to be alone. It was hard. And I was so often afraid that if people really knew all of me, and particularly around my sexuality, that they would reject me. And so what I often did was I overcompensated. I thought if I just work really, really hard, that if anyone ever finds out about my sexuality, that they'll say, well, but he's a really good pastor, let's just overlook that part. Reality was, when it all hit the fan, that's not how it played out. And I thought, boy, I loved all this time, all these hours, I loved all these people so well, and now they've rejected me. I thought I could somehow work to get their love, and I realized, no, I can't. But I also realized that in doing so, I was just killing myself from the inside. Because all I did was do, and I didn't know how to just be. And I remember when I left that church, I went into one of my coat pockets in my suit, and I had a business card in there from a pastor I had met at a wedding, who gave it to me one day and said to me, if you're ever ready to be true to yourself, there's always a place for you in the United Church of Christ. And I thought, oh my gosh, he knows about me. He knows. He's figured it out. His radar's gone off. And I said, well, thank you very much. Have a good day. God bless you. And I just kind of walked away. And I remember I left that in that coat for probably a year. And then when I went in that coat and took that card out, I remember him saying, he said there was a place where I could just be me. That'd be okay. And I remember when I left that church, I thought, I need a time to just be me now. I need a time to just stop doing and just be and to rest. And I thought, I've raked up some time now. I'm going to have to really take some time to rest, not like a day or two or a week, right? And some of us do that with grief when we lose loved ones, right? We go, and then finally we're baked for time, and then now we're going to have an extended time of grief and regroup. And I tell you what, I called that pastor, and he said, why don't you, the first thing he said to me when I told him I resigned, he said, well, why don't you come to my church this Sunday and preach? I just needed to sort of be, I didn't need to be doing. He said, well, come this Sunday and share your story, it'll be liberating. And I thought, okay, so I did. I went and I preached that Sunday. It was the first Sunday I stood in the pulpit, and I was able to just sort of be all of myself, and I felt fully loved because I felt fully known. And then afterwards, he came up to me and he said, I really want to hire you as my associate pastor. We're hiring. And I said, well, I'm going to have to think about that, because I'm pretty sure God told me that I need to take some time to regroup and to heal and just breathe and not be in ministry right now and try to figure out my life. I've been running from things for so long. And he said, you think about it a little bit more. I tell you what, 3 times I told him no, and he kept coming back trying to sweeten the deal with more money and scholarship dollars and all these things. He was encouraging me. And it was really hard. Because I thought, maybe this is an open door, this is a job, I need a job, I need to pay my bills. But I kept hearing God say, Josh, you can get a job that doesn't require you to do what you've been doing for a long time. You need time to rest, to be, to regroup, to have hard conversations with your family and people in your life, to grieve all that you've lost. And so I remember telling him no, and how hard that was. Because I knew that I needed to do the last thing God told me to do, and I shouldn't do anything else until I felt God tell me the next thing. And right now, I just felt very clearly God told me, you've been doing for a long time, you see to be. So I turned that job down, and I worked a job as a substitute teacher for a year, a 9-to-5 job. I never had to bring my work home. I just checked in, checked out, and came home, and I would rest after school every day, and I would grieve, and I would wrestle, and I would cry, and I would really just find myself finally sitting in silence and being. And I want to call us in this space this morning, I think, to a similar place. Some of us in the room, maybe you don't need to switch jobs or take a year like I did, but others of us, maybe you do need to do that, but maybe others of us, you just say, man, yeah, I'm really burning the candle at both ends, and I'm going to burn out real soon if I don't do something. And I would just say, I invite you, simple start, etch away an hour a day to just stop from what is necessary and to embrace something that brings you joy. And I don't know what that thing is, but find that thing and pour yourself into it and find yourself being filled and refreshed by it. And you may just fall in love with that you may expand that to 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day or every evening when I get home from work, this is this and this is what we're going to do. Because I believe that's what Jesus was calling us to, and Jesus was calling us to observe Sabbath. It's a time to stop and to remember what God has done, God's faithfulness in our lives. It is a time to stop and remember that even when we stop, God is still working. And it's going to be okay. The world will still revolve, will still move, and the sun will still rise. Let me share with you these last things as I invite the worship team to come this morning. Emma Patterson painted these, or drew these beautiful pictures. And I asked her to write a little bit about what these mean. And I tell you, when I got them back, I was like, I love these, because her explanation was not in any way like foofy and tried to like force meaning into something that wasn't actually there. Sometimes we do as adults, right? Or something, or this deep sense of tear-jerking, moving, oh my gosh. But it was just like, this is something that brings me joy. That sometimes when I'm just sitting bored in a class, I'm drawing and I'm finding joy in it and I'm being refreshed. That sometimes when something's just kind of stirring in my soul and I just want to get it out, I do this thing and I draw it and it's beautiful and I love it. I want to share with you one of these here about the explanation, which I think is the most beautiful. She said, I was doing a presentation on the Greek god of war, Eris, with a close friend of mine when I found a half-completed sword under my pen. 30 minutes later, when we had finished presenting, my friend was kind enough to let me cut out the sword from a poster and keep it. I don't know why, but this gives me a sense of pleasure at the very sight of it. Church, the whole reason, I think, for our art series is to teach us that there are so many gifts that God has given us through creation and through the created that call us to not just constantly be people who do, but people who can also just be. People who can find space and time to care for our souls, to care for our minds and our hearts. But there are so many gifts in the world that can bring us joy and bring us life. And if we would just embrace it, if we would just create time and space for it, it'll feed our souls. It'll renew us. And as Emma said, it'll bring us pleasure. And that pleasure, may we fan that into flame, for it'll feed our souls and remind us of a faithful God who has given us a world not just to do, but to also be. You stand with me and sing.
Standing up from crags and clay, peaks of earth, full display, that break the lines, that break the sky. It's full of life, full of life. Creation's dance, a tapestry, a symphony of life himself, of love herself. It's written in our very skin. All praise to the one who made it all, who made
the traditional bucket passing for our offering, but y'all are such a generous group, so if you're ever wanting to contribute, you can do so online, or you can drop your offering into the back. There's a couple boxes back there. All right, will you stand for our benediction today, please? Lord, amidst the doing, the to and fro, the day to day, your faithful presence has sustained us. May we acknowledge your faithfulness, pausing to reflect for a moment or a day or a season on the little joys. And may your laws never bind us, but always bring freedom, reminding us to lean to the greatest law,